Okay, welcome. Competency 9, Respiratory System. You're going to be referring to OpenStax, Chapter 22, and Patent, Chapter 36 and 37. I have added a few things on here. Of course, you're going to find these links in Blackboard, but if you're on here and you're looking at these and you have access, these are the links to the Padlet for respiratory, the Respiratory Padlet YouTube playlist, respiratory system keywords, and the respiratory system review. I am going to keep this video very brief. If there are any questions, please email me and let me know. The other thing is, if you do have questions about what we're doing in this particular presentation, check out the Respiratory Padlet YouTube playlist. I put some videos in there, and you know, I know for the Padlets, many of you pick one and you do that one, and that's fine. Some of you, many of you, watch all the videos, comment on all of them. But I do encourage you, if there are questions about what, you know, a specific process. This holds true for any competency in any chapter. Refer to the Padlet and any of those videos. They will definitely help you to understand what's going on maybe a little bit better. The other thing is, you can certainly go to YouTube, type in whatever issue it is that you may be having, or any confusion you may be having about a specific process. Just type it into YouTube. Maybe Amoeba Sisters or Crash Course or one of the 2-minute videos will help you understand better. So anyway, I want to keep these brief. They've been pretty long-winded. So part of keeping them brief is again, you have access to viewing just the slide shows. So that's how, without video, in Blackboard, again, under whatever module 1, 2, 3, or 4, videos and PowerPoints. Click on those, any of those tabs, and you'll have access to not only the link to the video that you're seeing now, but also the slideshow itself. So that's how you would access any of these, or another way to access these. So anyway, I want to keep the video short because you have access to these slides, and you have access to videos from other individuals that explain it differently, or with fancy graphics that make a lot of sense. So I really just want to focus on a couple of key points. So with respiratory physiology, we're primarily thinking of what's going on with cellular respiration. So that's the innermost aspect of what we're doing here. However, to get gases moved to the cells, gases pulled away, groceries in, garbage out, we have a couple of processes that have to take place. And we talked maybe a little bit in general A&P about these, but external respiration, of course, is bringing air from the outside to the lungs, specifically to the alveoli. Respiration means gas exchange. We also have seen the term ventilation, meaning gas exchange. But either way, respiration means gas exchange. So external respiration, simply broken down, means gas exchange that takes place via or from the external environment. So we would see that occur at the alveoli in the lungs. So, and again, any exchange, as you know by now, is occurring at a capillary network. And we know from the anatomy of the alveoli that they're covered in capillaries. So that first step of getting oxygen into the bloodstream and carbon dioxide out of the bloodstream is external respiration. At that point, oxygen's in the bloodstream. We send that blood back to the heart. We pump that blood out to the body. when we get to the capillary networks of the body systems, we're going to see oxygen getting dropped off, carbon dioxide getting picked up. That is what we call internal respiration. So we've done nothing but transportation with external respiration and internal respiration. We're just bringing in oxygen, transporting it ultimately to the cells. So external occurs in the alveoli, internal occurs in the capillary networks of the body tissues throughout the body. Yeah. We look at inspiration and expiration, also known as inhalation, exhalation, moving air in, moving air out. So we know that pressure gradients cause air to move. So when we look at air moves from high pressure to lower pressure. So the atmospheric pressure for us generally is 1 atmosphere or 1 ATM. You also see it written as 760 millimeters of mercury of pressure. So that 760 millimeters of mercury here, outside of the body, anytime it's lower than that, 755 inside of the lungs, that's going to cause air to be inspired or inhaled. As air comes in, pressure is going to change. And then at some point, we're going to have a higher pressure in the lungs. Again, the lower pressure, it's still 760 out here. So the atmosphere pressure generally doesn't change. We have very subtle shifts, but if you're in an airplane or altitude change, living at high altitudes, certainly we would see this become maybe a little bit different. But again, high pressure. Notice too the volume. So volume and pressure are inverse. So we see large volume, lower pressure. So this is kind of concurrent. So these are becoming larger and larger in volume. Pressure's decreasing, and that's what's causing air to continue to go in. So once we hit a certain peak, we're going to start exhaling. As we exhale, we're going to see once pressure inside, we get to a certain level where we're above 760, then we're going to see exhalation occurring. Generally, exhalation is a passive process that occurs again once we get to a higher pressure than outside. Okay. So we can see the lungs decreasing in volume as we start to exhale. That causes that's an increase in pressure. So anyway, that's what we're seeing there. We have the alveolar pressure that we just looked at, and then the atmospheric pressure, PA and PB. We also have intrapleural pressure, so in between the visceral and parietal pleura, we have that pleural cavity. That's the intrapleural space. And there's a pressure certainly in there. If you've done the PhysioX for respiratory, you looked at some of these concepts. So Boyle's law, again, volume of gas varies inversely with pressure. Okay? So volume and pressure are inverse. That just simply means as volume goes up, pressure goes down. Okay, as volume goes down, pressure goes up. So the lower the volume, the higher the pressure. Okay, so a couple of muscles. The primary muscle of inspiration is going to be the diaphragm. So the diaphragm is going to pull down. That's going to cause an increase in volume and a decrease in pressure. So as the diaphragm pulls down, and we can see here the diaphragm is attached to the pleura. As the diaphragm pulls down, it's going to increase, causing the lungs to pull down with it. That's going to cause an increase in volume and a decrease in pressure. Once that pressure gets below 760 millimeters of mercury, then air will naturally flow into the lungs. Okay, air moves from high pressure to lower pressure. Okay, so as the thorax expands, we're going to have a decrease in intrapleural pressure. And again, that's going to lead to coincide with a decrease in alveolar pressure. So again, as that diaphragm pulls down, intrapleural pressure decreases, volume increases. Okay? At the same time, alveolar pressure is decreasing as the volume has increased. Okay, once pressure A, or the pressure inside the alveoli, drops below atmospheric pressure, then we're going to see air moving into the lungs. Oh, by the way, too, it's talk about the diaphragm. There are accessory muscles to respiration, of course, your abdominal muscles, your intercostal muscles, your scalene muscles, even the trapezius muscles to a degree would assist with respiration. Let's see. All right. Exhalation or expiration, again, generally passive. Once the inspiratory muscles relax, the size of the thorax will start to decrease. So that decrease in size causes an increase in pressure. And once the pressure gets above 760, then we're going to see air moving from inside the lungs outside of the lungs, which it discusses here. Pulmonary volumes, again, if you did the PhysioX, you're already aware of these pulmonary volumes. So we have the normal resting breathing called tidal volume. And then we have the expiratory reserve volume. That's a forced exhalation. After a normal tidal volume in, tidal volume out. So 500 in, 500 out, and then that forced exhalation. That's going to get you to about 1 to 1.2 liters. And then inspiratory reserve volume is what they call a forced inhalation. So you do your normal tidal volume, and then you take a deep breath. And then once you get in there a little bit, take it as deep as you can go, and that gets you to about 3.3. So if we had 3.3 and 1.2, we had 4.5. And then we add 0.5 to that, we're up to 5 liters. And then the residual volume typically sits at around 1.2. So we would see probably close to 6,000 milliliters or 6 liters, 5 to 6 liters of lung capacity total. Oh, and by the way, too, that residual volume is what is always in there. It's the residual, it's the leftover. It's what keeps the lungs inflated. So we can see total lung capacity, or TLC. That's adding everything up, gets us to that 5,700 to 6,200 range. And again, that's in milliliters. So that would be 5.7 to 6.2 liters. So anyhow, you could take a look at this chart for a few seconds, or just pause the video, or again, you have access to these PowerPoints, or these slides, I should say. We do this, unfortunately, we're unable to meet in person, but we do this as a wet lab. We have spirometers, or little handheld spirometers, and we test some of these volumes out. So but anyway, PhysioX will take you through some of this as well if you haven't done it already. This may be a review for some of you as well. So again, I don't want to belabor too much of this, but you can see that the vital capacity includes basically everything that total lung capacity includes, except for the residual volume. So if total lung capacity is 6 liters or 6,000 milliliters, and residual volume is roughly 1,000 or 1,200, that'd take us to about 4,800. So vital capacity is around 4.8 liters or so. Anatomical dead space, that's areas that don't participate with gas exchange. So nasal cavities, sinus cavities, the pharynx, Okay. And then physiological dead space it occurs where we normally find the physiology, the gas exchange in the alveoli due to some sort of obstructive disorder. We may see physiological dead space developing. So anatomical dead space is normal. Physiological dead space is possibly due to some sort of pathology. So anyway, 6,000 total minute volume. So oddly enough, the capacity of the lungs, which the total lung capacity, which is about 6,000 mLs, also happens to be the total minute volume, the amount of air moved in and out per minute. Okay, so breaths per minute times tidal volume. So remember, tidal volume is roughly 500 mLs. We typically breathe roughly 12 breaths per minute. That's what puts us at the 6,000 milliliters. Now, during exercise, of course, BPM is going to go up. So we would see pulmonary airflow or the total minute volume certainly go up. And again, doing physio X's will take you through some of these items. Okay. Forced expiratory volume or FEV and forced vital capacity or FVC. That's the volume of air expired per second during a forced expiration. So again, that's going to be roughly 80% of the vital capacity. Yeah. So you can take a peek at those if you'd like. Alveolar ventilation. Again, ventilation is a fancy word, in essence, for gas exchange or respiration. Alveolar perfusion, that word perfusion just has to do with how well is and how much blood is flowing to the lungs. So we look at both of these. How efficient is the gas exchange? In other words, do we have a lot of CO2 built up? Do we have a lot of oxygen available? Not enough oxygen available? What's the airflow from mouth all the way to the alveoli? What kind of ventilation are we going to get from proper surfactants, the ability of the lungs to expand and contract, the ability to even get air to the lungs. And then alveolar perfusion has to do with how well are we getting blood flow to the lungs or to the alveoli. Okay, so these have to match up. If we're getting a excess amount of blood and not enough oxygen, these aren't matching up, or vice versa. So the efficiency of gas exchange is determined by how much blood is flowing to the lungs and how much air is getting to the lungs. It makes sense. Okay. Where is all of this controlled? Generally, we would look at the brainstem area, the medulla. We see what's called the medullary rhythmicity center. We have the dorsal respiratory group and the ventral respiratory group. We see chemoreceptors having to do, of course, everything physiologically has to do with chemical release and chemical reactions. So in order to get the MRC to activate, there are going to be chemoreceptors in the dorsal area of that region, and then patterns of respiration as well. So the rhythmicity center. Okay, what's the breathing rhythm? Okay. The pons, there's the apneustic center in the pons that basically regulates this rhythm. The pons, remember, is closer linked to the hypothalamus, to the diencephalon. So we're getting nerve flow to signals sent to the pons from the diencephalon, and then that regulates the medulla. And then there's what they call the pontine respiratory group, or the pneumotaxic center in the pons. So every boss has a boss, right? So the medulla's boss for breathing is going to be the pons. The pons' boss goes up even a little bit further, certainly into the diencephalon. But this little illustration shows where we have the pons. You can notice the pons, remember, is the pouch, or forms the P of the brainstem. Okay, when we see that PRG, pneumotaxic and apneustic centers. And we see again that dorsal respiratory group having to do with a lot of the chemoceptors, so the chemicals received. So this is apneustic, turns things on. Pneumotaxic, we may slow things down. So again, it's the rhythmicity and the rate at which we're breathing. And so that dorsal respiratory group, we're going to get external and intercostals and diaphragm. From that ventral group, we're going to get these accessory muscles, like I said, the scalenes, as well as these intercostals. Serratus anterior, these are the serratus muscles. Yeah. So anyhow, partial pressure of oxygen, partial pressure of carbon dioxide, pH, as you've seen if you've done the PhysioX labs. If not, you'll see some of this driven home, especially the pH lab. So partial pressure of oxygen just has to do with how much oxygen is available, how much of it is available to diffuse from outside to inside, how much carbon dioxide is available to be released. So these two are oxygen in, carbon dioxide out. The partial pressure of those will lead us to what type of gas exchange that we're going to get and how efficient it's going to be. And how much carbon dioxide in the blood is going to act on different chemoreceptors within that brain stem, the pons and the medulla and the midbrain. So the partial pressure of carbon dioxide, in other words, if there's a lot of carbon dioxide, then partial pressure of carbon dioxide is going to be high. And so the rhythmicity centers in the brainstem are going to, the chemoreceptors are going to pick up the amount of carbon dioxide that's in the blood. And if that amount is a little bit higher than maybe what the normal level is, then it's going to trigger diaphragm to flatten out, breathing then, because remember, as that diaphragm flattens out, it causes the volume of the lungs to increase, and it causes the pressure to decrease, go below that 760. So then oxygen is going to come in, and now I've increased oxygen partial pressure in the blood. And so then we're going to get the capillary networks and chemoreceptors up here in the brainstem are going to pick up partial pressure of oxygen going up, partial pressure of carbon dioxide is going down. So then we can trigger these internal intercostals, some of the accessory muscles that help with exhalation to occur. So we need to breathe out. So the breathe in, breathe out, breathe in, inhalation, exhalation, inspiration, expiration is monitored by the brainstem, and typically the chemoreceptors monitoring how much carbon dioxide and how much oxygen is in the bloodstream. That will determine how much we need to involve the diaphragm and get it moving to bring oxygen levels up. And then certainly pH is going to be monitored. The kidneys monitor pH. We're going to see other areas where pH is monitored. And if we see pH in the acidic range, so anything in the blood lower than 7, we're going to potentially get a trigger of ventilation or respiration to occur. More oxygen in, more carbon dioxide out will help to balance or regulate pH. In fact, your respiratory system is the primary regulating center for pH balance. Kidneys or urinary are they're second in command for pH regulation. Cerebral cortex, certainly, with visuals, other factors that influence breathing, seeing certain things, being exposed to certain environmental factors and influences will also influence rate of respiration. So gas exchange, again, partial laws of partial pressures, that simply just means, remember that the air has more than just oxygen in it. In fact, oxygen is a small percentage of the total volume of gases in the air. So the partial pressure is simply the total pressure is all of the partial pressures of these gases all added up. So P1, P2, so this could be the pressure of nitrogen, the pressure of oxygen, the pressure of carbon dioxide. All of those added up give you total pressure, total air pressure. So again, this number is 760 typically, and then these numbers are going to add up to 760. So those are the partial pressure numbers. So here's a graphic showing partial pressures. And again, Dalton is the one who came up with this law of partial pressures, just that different gases have different pressures. All of those gases combined give us total pressure. Each one separately is called the partial pressure. Again, that's Dalton's law. Boyle's law goes back to looking at volume and pressure being inversely related. Okay, so Boyle's law. Okay, so anyway, this is Dalton's law. Okay, 760 millimeters of mercury. It's a total, and again, we see nitrogen takes up 78% of that. So the partial pressure of nitrogen is 592 millimeters of mercury. Partial pressure of oxygen, carbon dioxide, and so on. So we see that 99% of the air that we breathe that's in the atmosphere is nitrogen or oxygen. Okay, and then notice carbon dioxide and other gases make up very little of that pie. And we've already discussed exchange of gas. Again, oxygen pressure gradient, surface area, how much surface area is available to distribute the oxygen. How many times are we breathing per minute? Are the alveoli able to perform gas exchange? Okay. And then once all these add up, then we can throw in perfusion too. How much blood is able to get to the alveoli of the lungs? Okay. So we see the partial pressure of oxygen is 100, 100, 100, right? So partial pressure of oxygen coming in is only 40. So this is the venous blood. So again, gases are going to move from high pressure to low pressure. So oxygen naturally will diffuse from high pressure to low pressure. Okay, notice it's still diffusing. It's at 70 now. And then as blood continues, we keep pumping oxygen in. We get to the end into that area, and we see we're all balanced out. Okay, now carbon dioxide, remember carbon dioxide in the air is very small. Carbon dioxide in the venous return from the heart out over to the lungs is going to be higher. So we're going to see that natural diffusion of carbon dioxide out of the bloodstream. And then we see once we reach equilibrium, carbon dioxide stops moving. Okay. Again, alveolar surface area, capillary surface area, uh, hemoglobin, we've looked at that. Again, those oxygens are going to bind to one of the four heme groups contained within each hemoglobin. And again, there are hundreds of millions of hemoglobins, billions of hemoglobins per uh, per red blood cell. One red blood cell will have hundreds of millions of hemoglobins. And so we can look at hemoglobin levels in the clinical aspect. Okay. So again, oxygen, partial pressure of 40, oxygen in the alveoli 100, so we're going to get oxygen movement. Okay. And then we add in, so that's in the plasma. Then we look at the red blood cells, we throw those in there, and we've got these hemoglobin molecules that oxygen is able to attach to. So the bulk of transport in the blood is going to come certainly in whole blood with the red blood cells being involved. Without red blood cells, we're going to see we can still transport oxygen, but notice how small, 0.3 milliliters of oxygen per 100 milliliters of blood, 20 milliliters of oxygen over here if we throw in the red blood cells. So we can do a hematocrit, we can do a hemoglobin, and we can find out if we're lacking in red blood cells or we're lacking in hemoglobin. So we're still get a little bit of oxygen, but not much without the presence of red blood cells. So one of the things the body will do if it perceives that the partial pressure of oxygen is too low, partial pressure of carbon dioxide is too high, will start, your body will trigger hematopoiesis to occur, where we're going to start to see red blood cells being released from bone marrow, try to increase red blood cell count. So anyway, CO2, some of it's going to get dissolved in plasma. Some of it is going to combine with hemoglobin, less than a quarter of carbon dioxide. So about 20% will combine with the amine groups of the hemoglobin, as well as other proteins. We get what's called carbaminohemoglobin. Kind of a mouthful. Carbon dioxide attaching to an amine group on the hemoglobin is all that means. So it's about 20%. So again, if we have a higher PCO2, meaning partial pressure of carbon dioxide is higher, just means we have more carbon dioxide. So there's going to be a higher affinity for carbon dioxide to associate with hemoglobin. And then we notice the bulk, so about roughly 70% of carbon dioxide is going to be carried in the plasma as what we call bicarbonate ions. So that helps with the buffering system of the blood. Now, if carbon dioxide is too high, we can get too low of a pH or too acidic of a pH. Okay. If carbon dioxide levels are too high in the plasma, that leads to a shift in pH into the acidic range, because some of this carbon dioxide is going to disassociate with the presence of what we call carbonic anhydrase and water. We're going to get what's called carbonic acid in between. So before we get to that bicarbonate ion buffers, remember 70% of carbon dioxide is transported in this fashion right here. So once carbon dioxide and water, remember these are the byproducts of cellular respiration. Mitochondria perform cellular respiration. The byproducts, of course, we get ATP out of the deal, but we also get carbon dioxide and water. Those are going to leave the cell, go into the interstitial space, travel into the plasma of the blood. En route, we're going to see carbonic anhydrase. Notice it has ASE, so this is some sort of an enzyme that's going to break up carbon dioxide, ACE anhydrase, carbonic. So we're going to we're going to add these two together. We're going to end up with carbonic acid. We get hydrogen in the front. So we added an O. That gives us the O3. We still have one C. And then we added an H2 in front of that. So that's what makes it an acid. And then we can, so this is going to cause an increase in pH, acidity of pH. It's going to increase hydrogen ion concentration in the blood. So then we're going to see the breaking up of that. We're going to dissociate that hydrogen ion, and then we're going to get a bicarbonate ion out of the deal. So we can see this acting as a buffer to help with the excess hydrogen ion concentration. So if there is too much carbon dioxide in the blood, it will lead to a higher pH, or I guess on the pH scale, a lower number, but a higher concentration of hydrogen ions, which means more acidic, which means a pH on the scale of a lower number. Okay, so remember pH, the H means hydrogen ions. Always associate carbon dioxide with hydrogen ion concentration, which we would associate with pH values, acidity, and alkalinity, or acid-base balance. Okay, so part of acid, the main part of acid-base balance is the ability to get rid of carbon dioxide, to exhale carbon dioxide. What that does in turn is eliminates some of this hydrogen ion concentration as well. The kidneys, as we'll see later, are going to help with eliminating hydrogen ions as well. We can pee out excess hydrogen ion. We can also exhale excess carbon dioxide. So what the body does initially, through proper exhalation, proper inhalation, proper ventilation, is get rid of carbon dioxide. So the less carbon dioxide I have, the less hydrogen ions I have. So the less work the kidneys have to do to eliminate hydrogen ions, or lower pH concentration, getting us back to neutral. Okay. So you can see the difference between, we've got arterial blood versus venous blood. And again, we see the carbon dioxide in arterial blood still there. It's very minimal. Okay. In venous blood, it's going to be higher. We see higher amounts of bicarbonate and carbaminohemoglobin. And again, systemic gas exchange, we're just simply releasing oxygen out of the bloodstream. High partial member oxygen, all gases move from high pressure to low pressure. So the pressure of partial pressure of oxygen in the capillaries of the body systems is going to exceed what we see at the tissue level. So oxygen will naturally move from high partial pressure to low partial pressure. So anyhow, I'm going to stop there. That's it. We're going to continue talking about pH balance and some of the other main features of respiratory, but that's it for now. And if you have questions, as always, please email me and I'll get back to you. And in the meantime, though, remember to check out the Padlets, check out the Padlet YouTube video, table of content playlist. So anyway, review questions. There's plenty for you to look at.